Senate will come to order. The secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores, Gutierrez, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, King, Colcourse, LaMantilla, Menendez, Middleton, Miles, Nichols, Parker, Paxton, Perry, Schwertner, Sparks, Springer, West, Whitmire, Zaffarini.
A quorum is present. Please rise in the gallery and on the floor for the invocation delivered by Pastor Derek Rogers, Cowboy Church in Corsicana. Pastor?
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come boldly before your throne today. God, we ask you for wisdom and knowledge and understanding. And Father, I thank you for these men and women who have been elected to serve the great state of Texas. And God, I ask you today to give them courage and boldness to lead upon the principles of your word, that you may continue to bless our state and keep your hand upon us. May they never turn away from you, Father, for direction in order to please men, but always seek you for direction and seek to please you. And Father, I pray that you will keep them and protect them and bless their families. And God, we ask all of these things today in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. You may be seated. Dean of the Senate moves to excuse Senator King on account of family illness. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is adopted. Dean of the Senate moves to suspend the reading of yesterday's journal. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is adopted. Following message from the governor, the secretary will read the message.
To the Senate of the 88th Legislature, regular session, I ask the advice, consent, and confirmation of the Senate with respect to the following appointments. To be members of the Texas A&M University System Board of Regents: David C. Baggett, Jr., Houston; John W. Bellinger, San Antonio; R. Sam Torn, Houston. To be judge of the 476th Judicial District Court, Hidalgo County: Ishmael D. Fonseca, Jr., McAllen. To be members of the One Call Board of Texas: Joel L. Canales, Frisco; Roberto G. Robert De Leon, Corpus Christi; Derek M. Delgado, Pasadena; Senora Sandy Galvan, San Antonio. Respectfully submitted, Greg Abbott, Governor of Texas, to nominations.
Senator Schwertner, you're recognized on the Doctor of the Day.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, today we have Dr. Lena Poole serving as our Doctor of the Day. Dr. Poole attended the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio, as well as completing her residency there in San Antonio. Dr. Poole is employed by WellMed Medical Management, serving as a physician and associate medical director. She is a valued member of the Texas Academy of Family Physicians. We are very blessed and welcome Dr. Poole for her serving as Doctor of the Day here in the Texas Capitol. Thank you.
Want to welcome everyone in the gallery. Thank you for joining us on spring break week and visiting your capital. Good to have you with us. Members, if we have your attention a moment, we're going to do some nominations here. By the way, we had a first members up here. A page actually came to the candy drawer and said they didn't want any. I don't know what hurts me more, that or one of you who said you were voting yes on a bill that switches your vote to no. I'm not sure which hurts more. The following report from the Nominations Committee, the Secretary will read the report.
Senate Committee on Nominations Action Report for the meeting held on March 13th, 2023.
Senator Campbell, Chair of the Committee, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the Senate Committee on Nominations Action Report that is dated March 13th was placed on your desk yesterday to meet the 24-hour layout rule. These nominees are now eligible to be confirmed by the Senate. Mr. President, I move to confirm the nominees that are listed on the March 13th Committee Action Report that is before us.
Members, any motion to sever? Hearing none, Senator Campbell moves that the nominees reported favorably for the Nominations Committee be confirmed. The Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton.
Being 30 ayes and no nays, the nominees are all confirmed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and Mr. President.
Yes, ma'am.
And members.
Listen up.
Let me now introduce you to your new Secretary of State, Secretary Jane Nelson.
should wear shoes like this.
I know, don't they look comfortable?
Yeah, because you wouldn't have back problems.
That's what I say. I say not bring these up and down the stairs all day.
Yeah,
I see my wife put on the hair. I go, why?
yeah.
Because they're cute. I'm like, so what? Who are you trying to impress?
They really are very attractive, but I'm married to a short guy, so I've never worn heels
Oh,
taller than that. But I've been wearing flats
Good for you.
this session.
Why
And
not?
yeah.
You know,
I figure if Zavarini can, I can.
they're attractive, and who cares? It's not their problem. They don't have to wear them, right? No one should worry about what
But
anybody.
they look good.
Yeah, I think those
Those
are cool.
skinny tall shoulders.
Yeah, but you know what? If you're wearing them for yourself, cool. Do whatever you want. But I don't like it when people wear things for other people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, society's done a lot of that, making people pressure to look good for someone else. And that's, I've got a 20-year-old daughter, so you can understand where I'm coming from, yeah?
I've got 6 granddaughters.
Oh, there you go.
And they're all drop dead gorgeous.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course they are.
really.
Yeah,
But it doesn't.
of course it does. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we have work to do, but
Yes, sir, we do. And your speakers. Your speakers.
Chair recognizes Senator Campbell for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I want to welcome the challenge group from Dripping Springs Classical Conversations. Stand up. Thank you for being here. Welcome to your Texas Senate.
Good to have you with us today. Thank you, Senator. Senator Nelson, I knew when you were here last year, it would not be the last time we saw you on the Senate floor, and we're very proud to have you as our Secretary of State. Thank you. Chair lays out the following resolution. The Secretary will read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 306 by Gutierrez, recognizing March 1st, 2023 as Uvalde County Day at the state capitol.
I'm sorry.
Senator Gutierrez, you're recognizing your resolution. And Senator Swertner and Senator Parker, he's speaking right behind you there. I know you didn't know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me this time today, Mr. President. I know that our time is valuable, but today I want to recognize some of the leaders from the county of Uvalde, some very good friends of mine. Normally, when we have a county day, we're talking about the things that make our counties precious. We talk about their histories. We talk about...
Excuse me, members, can we have some order on the floor for this resolution? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that. We talk about, for instance, John Nance Gardner, the vice president under FDR, was from Uvalde, Texas. Our beloved governor, Dolph Briscoe, was from Uvalde. They make some great pecans in Uvalde. They grow some great pecans, Mr. President, in Uvalde. Former honey capital of Texas, great hunting and recreation. Unfortunately, May 24th has now caused us to remember Uvalde in a different way. And so because of that, and I think that we'll have plenty of time to debate all of the issues that arose because of that, and we'll do that some other day. But I do want to recognize the people that are here, Mr. President, and thank you for allowing me to do that. I want to acknowledge the day that they had to live that day, and in many instances, the first time I got to know them. When you represent a Senate district that's larger than Rhode Island, you don't get to be everywhere. You try as best you can. You know a few people. I knew County Judge Bill Mitchell from before. He's up in the gallery. The judge that day, on May 24th, I called him very early on. We had a few calls during that day. I made my way out there that evening. He exhausted himself living through that horror. In many instances, watching these young parents that he knew as children go through the horror of losing their little children, of not being able to identify them, and having to wait hours for that identification process to happen. As I arrived that night at what was generally called the Civic Center, that night called the Reunification Center, Bill Mitchell's staff had told me the judge had he had to go. And it was late by the time I got there. It was about 9:30. And he had been working all day long, as was my good friend now, the Mayor, Don McLaughlin. The Mayor McLaughlin, he and I probably wouldn't agree on much before this day, but we agree on a whole hell of a lot now. And I've gotten to call him a dear friend of mine and a supporter and just a really, really good, fine person. He has done so much for his constituency by way of demanding transparency, giving them as many answers as he can, and he wants to give them more. And he too watched friends, in some instances, relatives of his own employees pass on. The next day, in May 25th, I went to the Community Health Development, Inc., and I met a woman named Mayela Castañon. Mayela runs the therapy clinic, that is the Clinica, the clinic for the community. Uvalde is a county of about 18,000. About 11,000 people are served by her clinic. And we tried to get some funding for her, and we have been able to get some private funding. And she has done an incredible job. Mayela, too, had a father who worked for her, who lost his little girl. She had 4 other employees, I think, that lost relatives of their cousins and nieces and nephews. That's the nature of what happened on that day. It was so close. There wasn't a situation where you didn't know someone that lost a child or lost a teacher. Third or fourth day, I met Hector Gonzalez, who I now call a dear friend as well. Hector is our president, college president at Southwest Texas Junior College, which do a tremendous amount of great work in that part of the country of our state, Mr. President, on trades, making sure we're training people to do the jobs in the oil field and such. Hector opened the college doors to us, so much so that we moved our office, our western office, from Eagle Pass and hired Carlos Lopez, who was the Democratic Party chair, to run that office for us. And we now have an office at the community college because it was important, as you know, you and I talked in those first few days, Governor, about making sure that the community had the resources that it needed. And so we were trying to be a liaison between different state agencies. And that was important to us. Luis Fernandez is with the Uvalde ISD board president. Luis, too, has had to deal with a tremendous amount of just all of that drama, all of that heartache, all of that tragedy as the school board president. Lost children of friends that he went to school with who lost their children. John Yackel is here with us today. John has been a tremendous asset. He's the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce. John and others, along with the mayor and the county judge, were instrumental in taking, as you know, millions of dollars flooded in to the community. It was a conversation that I had with Senator Zaffarini. She said that when Sutherland Springs incident occurred, that families only got 40% of the monies raised, which is just a travesty, which is something that we should be looking at into the future to make sure that these NGOs and nonprofits do the right thing. John and others made sure that that happened, and the money that was raised went directly to families that had lost their children. Families had children that were injured. Not one deviation of one penny went to anywhere else other than the kids that were in that school and their relatives and kids that had trauma. I met a little boy, Cesar Hernandez, who's in the 3rd grade. He was in the school. I met him about a week later, and this little boy couldn't speak. He just couldn't speak. He couldn't speak anymore because of the trauma that he had experienced just from the gunshots that were going on that day. I don't want to beleaguer the point because we have work to do, and I just appreciate you giving me this moment. But what I do want everybody to understand, and also thank you for, is that these folks, more than me, I stayed about 15 days, but they grew up with these people that lost their children and lost their husbands. or their wives, rather, and the two teachers that passed on. They grew up with them, they saw it, and they lived through the horror of this day. And I hope that by what we're doing today, and I've told them earlier, by the way, and I want to thank specifically Senator Huffman, if she's here, for her leadership. I think she probably stepped out. We're doing so far about $30 million, thanks to you as well, and leadership of others. Specifically, to go to mental health in the Uvalde area, to go to $15 million to help rebuild the school between SB 30 and SB 1. And it's not about money, but it's just about showing that we care. But I also would like us to remember that we should unite in this thing. This horrible tragedy isn't about Republican politics or Democratic politics. We have to unite in solving the problems that are facing us each and every day, just like Mayor McLaughlin and I have united on raising the age limit. We have to come together where we can to make Texas safer. I just want to thank you, and thank you all for listening, and thank you all for welcoming these people. Don't just shake their hand, go over there and give them a hug. We've seen the most horrific things you've ever seen. This mayor's seen just about every bit of videotape and footage that I've seen. Sometimes I wonder if we should have even looked at that stuff to begin with. But I'll never forget it. I'll never forget those images. I go to bed each night thinking about it as you do. They're good people. None of us deserve this. But they're here to live to tell about it. And they want to do something for these children. And before I close today, Mr. President, I do just want to remember, if you would indulge me, in just remembering the names of the most important people in Uvalde. And that starts with Uzziah Garcia, a little boy lost his life. Rogelio Torres, Miranda Mathis, Alicia Ramirez, Nevaeh Bravo, Ileana Torres, Layla Salazar, Annabelle Rodriguez, Jace Luevanos, Ileana Garcia, Tess Mata, Maite Rodriguez, Jayla Silguero, A. Marie Jo Garza, Kenna Elrod, Irma Garcia, Alexandria Lexi Rubio, Eva Mireles, Xavier Lopez, Jacqueline Cáceres, and Jose Flores. And with that, Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Very well done. I know how much this has impacted you personally. For our mayor, I worked with the mayor before this happened on several issues from time to time. And Mayor, I think members, and many of you represent small towns. We have so many across Texas. When a tragedy happens, it impacts our big cities as well. But when it happens in a small town, the mayor knows the people personally, which makes the job of being mayor even that much more difficult. He knew all the players who responded. He knew the families of those killed that day or traumatized that day. And so I think the mayor and all the people standing here on the floor, and I do not know all of you as well as I know the mayor, and some of you I'll meet the first time, but Mayor, what you did, and I know we talked almost every day, what you did on behalf of your community, I've really never seen anyone respond the way you did and do the work that you did. And you're one of the heroes of that day, along with all of those that are standing with you. But Mayor, you did an extraordinary job in a very difficult circumstance, more than almost any mayor would ever face. So we honor you. We're glad you're all here today. Members, the resolution for Uvalde County Day. Let's all stand in honor of these men and women and all those who aren't here that day. Senator Betancourt.
Mr. President, I'd like to add the names of all the senators in the Senate to the resolution.
Any objection? Hearing none, that motion is adopted. The resolution. Senator West, did you have a question?
I'd ask that all the remarks be spread on the journal for the day also.
Any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. The resolution is adopted. Thank you, members. Chair recognizes Senator Miles for an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, President, I'd like to take an opportunity. I was surprised today, and I'm very honored that I was surprised today by a group of people from my district, the Elevated Place School. Will y'all please stand, students from Stafford, Texas? They came down. This is their members. This is their very, very first time to their state capital. And they're in Stafford, Texas. Mr. Wakiti Muhammad, who is the director and the owner of the school, and my very, very long-time friend, Aline Ajari, is up there. He's a science teacher, and he decided to bring them down, Mr. President. And this is their very first time to their capital. I wanted to make sure I recognize them and let you know, from the neighborhood, from the neighborhood we're from, to the state senate, you too can do it. Thank y'all for being here. All right?
Welcome and good to have you with us today. Thank you, Senator Miles. Surprises are good occasionally, Senator Miles, right? Surprises are good. Chair lays out the following resolution. Secretary, read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 316 by Menendez, recognizing March 15th, 2023 as Texas Small Business Development Center Day at the state capitol.
Senator Menendez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I rise to recognize this day as Texas Small Business Development Center Day. It's no surprise to anybody in this capitol that small business is the backbone of our nation, our state, and our cities and towns. And so that's why today the Texas Small Business Development Center is a part of America's Small Business Development National Program established in 1979 to support small businesses around the nation. For more than 35 years, the Texas Small Business Development Center has provided businesses consulting to clients at no cost, offered them affordable training to guide small businesses through every stage of development. And today, the Texas SBDC network has established several lead offices at universities, including UTSA, and colleges across the state of Texas, and over 50 field and specialty centers in our urban and rural areas. Their efforts to support small business have had a very positive impact in our state and every state in the nation. Throughout 2022, they supported with financing, including Small Business Administration COVID loans. It is estimated that they helped save nearly 17,000 jobs and created an additional 10,500. Furthermore, companies affiliated with the Small Business Development Center have generated around $553 million in new sales and $92 million in tax revenue. Programs and organizations like the Small Business Development Center is one of the many reasons why Texas continues to prosper, and one of the many reasons why small businesses continue to be the backbone of our economic engine. Members, please help me in recognizing this day and the group that have come. They're standing right behind me here in the southeast corner. Let's welcome them to their state capitol and thank them for saving so many jobs and creating jobs. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Good to have you with us. Members, the motion is on the adoption of resolution. Any objection? Hearing none. Resolution is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, that concludes the morning call. Senator Huffman, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business on committee substitute for Senate Bill 30.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. At this time, I move to suspend the regular order of business, take up and consider the committee substitute to Senate Bill 30. Members, Senate Bill 30 is the supplemental budget for the 2022-23 biennium. Each session, our General Appropriations Act is developed largely based on projected revenue and expenses over a 2-year period. We then true up those projections and address unforeseen costs or changes in revenue through the supplemental budget. The committee substitute to Senate Bill 30 does just that, and also makes several one-time investments to bolster important legislative priorities such as school safety, inpatient mental health care capacity, public safety, reducing our debt, and preserving our state historic sites and parklands. The committee substitute to Senate Bill 30 appropriates $11.8 billion in all funds, including $5 billion in general revenue and $1.4 billion in federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA as we call it. This bill puts us $5.6 million under the constitutional spending limit for the current biennium. Specifically, the committee substitute includes $2.3 billion to continue the legislature's commitment to expanding inpatient mental health care capacity. Senator Kolkhorst has been hard at work on a plan to strategically allocate this funding across the state with a focus on addressing our forensic wait list. We hear from our sheriff so often about this wait list, and she's focusing on that. $600 million to provide additional assistant grants to school districts for safety and security upgrades, and I know Senator Nichols is working on that school security bill. $1 billion to provide supplemental benefit enhancements to retired educators. Now, members, last Friday I filed Senate Bill 10. You all joint authored it. It provides for a $7,500 check to retirees that are 75 years and older, as well as a cost of living adjustment starting in the next biennium to be paid for in the 24-25 General Appropriations Act. So this is a partial payment for that enhancement, but we're paying some of that up front. Nearly $300 million for the Department of Criminal Justice operations, including additional security measures. After an extensive review of the escape of convicted murderer Gonzalo Lopez in May of 2022, these targeted resources are necessary to bolster TDCJ facilities, equipment, and general operations to prevent this kind of horrific tragedy from happening again. So we wanted to focus some of that money early on so that TDCJ can get started on those improvements. We're appropriating $1 billion towards the Employee Retirement System unfunded liability. So members, this is just a payment in advance. It goes into the fund, and it will save $5.5 billion in interest payments for future taxpayers and shave 5 years off the funding period. We allocate $2.9 billion to address the Medicaid shortfall and an adjustment of $8.2 billion to the Foundation School Program resulting from updated projections since appropriations were made last session, specifically increased district property growth, lower than anticipated average daily attendance, and increased non-GR revenues. We put $4 million aside to address deferred maintenance at state-managed facilities, $300 million to endow the Historic Infrastructure Sustainability Trust Fund to ensure proper preservation of our state's rich historic buildings, sites, and artifacts, and $200 million to fund the Texas State Buildings Preservation Endowment to assist in future maintenance, preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration of historic state buildings, including courthouses. And there's more. These are the highlights. This is the starting point for the supplemental budget. The bill will make its way through the House, of course. I'll continue to work with each of you and, of course, with Dr. Bond and the House members on refining these issues. And with that, I move suspension of the regular order of business.
Senator Birdwell, for what purpose?
Question of the author, Mr.
You
President.
yield.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Huffman. Just one question. Based upon what we spent last regular session in the biennium in which we're in now, and adding this expenditure to that Appropriations Act of last session in the biennium we're in now, do we still remain under the revenue, not revenue cap, but the
Spending limit?
expenditure? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we are $5 million under the spending limit with this supplemental appropriation. Of course, it could change later in the House, but the House has made a commitment. Dr. Bonin has made a commitment that he as well will stay under the spending limit, so they may give and take a little here and there as they do, but there is a commitment for us to stay under the spending limit. And of course, the bill will come back and be conferenceable as well, of course, but my commitment is it will stay under the spending limit. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Sure.
Thank you, Senator Birdwell. The motion is on suspension. Any objection? Hearing none. Chair now lays out on second reading Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 30. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 30 relating to supplemental appropriations and reductions in appropriations.
You're recognized for the motion to engrossment.
I move passage to engrossment of the Committee Substitute to Senate Bill 30.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is adopted. You're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
30 ayes and no nays. The rule is suspended. Chair now lays out on third reading and final passage Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 30. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 30 relating to supplemental appropriations and reductions in appropriations.
Before I recognize you on final passage, I want to thank you. It takes several minutes to pass the bill on the floor, but it took you months of work.
Yes, sir.
Endless hours, 7 days a week, and thank you for all of your work on this. You're recognized on final.
I move final passage of the Committee Substitute to Senate Bill 30.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores.
There being 30 ayes, no nays, the bill passes with unanimous votes. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Whitmire, you are recognized to suspend the regular order of business on Senate Bill 402.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move to suspend the Senate's regular order of business to take up and consider Senate Bill 402. Senate Bill 402 amends current law to give preference to trial courts to schedule hearings and hold trials for defendants charged with murder and capital murder. Despite the constitutional right to a speedy trial, there have been increasing reports of defendants facing murder and capital murder charges waiting years for hearings and trial. This particularly speaks to a crisis in Harris County, which, in my judgment, faces very dangerous circumstances for all the stakeholders, including the defendants, our correction officers, our prosecutors, and in particular, the victims. We have 1,841 defendants waiting to go to trial or hearing for murder or capital murder. Only half of them are in the Harris County Jail. So think for a moment. We have 900 murderers or capital murders loose on the streets of Houston, Harris County that have been charged with capital murder. It's unheard of in my career in working in criminal justice that a capital murder would be on bond. The problem is we have about 600 of these capital murders or murders that are fugitives. So why should it concern each and every member on the floor? They don't remain in Harris County. They're the most dangerous. They know if they're captured by law enforcement, they're going to be held accountable and go to trial and either face life without parole or the death sentence or found innocent. But they're desperate individuals, they're dangerous individuals, repeat violent offenders, and the impact on Harris County is unbearable. It's created a jail backlog. We have 500 defendants located in Louisiana. We have 500 located in Post, Texas, at a cost of millions of dollars. But more importantly, the victims cannot have closure. So, as I've said repeatedly in my career, criminal justice is a system, Mr. President. Any part of the system that's broken affects the front end, the back end. The lawman on the street arrests these individuals at great danger to the officers, then to see them placed on bond, become fugitives, or they sit in the county jail for 4 and 5 years. County jails are not designed for long-term confinement. They're for short-term confinement. They're holding people that are supposed to go to trial and be held accountable. This serves the innocent that are charged with a crime. So this alone will not fix Harris County's criminal justice problems, but it will take a huge step by saying, Judge, you ought to be doing this already, using your own sound judgment. Take the worst of the worst to the first of the line. So this will instruct Harris County judges and other jurisdictions, prioritize your cases. We're giving them guidance to take a capital murderer or murderer defendant to the front of the line and dispose of that case. We have 1,841 murderers or capital murders waiting for a hearing or go to court. With that, Mr. President, I would move suspension of the regular order of business.
Senator Springer, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. To ask the author some questions.
Do you yield?
Certainly.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate your time yesterday in visiting on this and helping bring a non-lawyer up to speed. And I understand the challenges that Harris County faces, and you're right. They don't, if they're out, they can go anywhere they want to go in relation to that. But help me understand as a non-lawyer, when it says on line 9, giving preference, it is my understanding that giving preference, me, it's like preferences, I like chocolate donuts more than glazed donuts. But preference in this, is it my understanding that that means they have to take those that are listed, and we're adding to the list that already exist for under 17 and other people to go, that they have to go first, assuming, I guess, that the case is ready.
Yes, sir. This is amending the government code, taking language from the penal code that already says family violence, sexual abuse of a minor, other heinous crimes will be given priority at the docket. And this will add murders and capital murders.
And as I came up yesterday and it said, my concern is while a murder is a bad thing, so is rape. And that, on the surface, a murder may sound like a murder where somebody breaks into a house and murders somebody. It can also be a drug deal that went bad, where somebody murders somebody else. While somebody else may be sitting on a rape that says, this was a grievous crime that the community is rallying against, that says this needs to go to trial. But if we have this, all the murder cases have to go before that rape case can go. Assuming that when they're ready.
And to begin with, Senator, if you don't have a backlog in your community, which I would suspect you do not, this will be a non-issue. Most judges use good judgment and discretion and take the worst of the worst, the cases that are ready, to trial, to a hearing. What has happened in Harris County, our system is broken. Our local stakeholders, our judges, and county officials blame it on Harvey conditions because they haven't been able to have the facilities for 5 years. Quite frankly, I'm tired of hearing that excuse. They can do better. Then they blame it on the pandemic. We still have judges operating under social distancing. The bottom line is you have to move these cases, and as they move the cases, I'm saying in the backlog, make capital murderers and murderers your priority. The rape is a horrible crime. In many instances, it should be at the front of the line. I think based on what the docket looks like in your local jurisdiction. Somewhat familiar with your district, I'd be shocked if you have a backlog of cases in your communities. And furthermore, I would, without even knowing your judges, give them the credibility that they know what they're doing and are using good judgment. Harris County is a different situation, and I'm sad about it. And it doesn't just affect Harris County and my delegation, it affects surrounding areas, and it will affect the entire state when you have 600 fugitives. That means we don't know where they are. They've already been arrested, probable cause, locked up, and given a bond, and then we lose contact with them. They're on the streets of Texas for murder or capital murder. We have to, one, apprehend them and then hold them accountable by putting them at the front of the line. And they're the most dangerous as law enforcement approaches them because they know the consequences of their acts. This will also address those innocent individuals that are sitting in the Harris County Jail 4 and 5 years. But most importantly, if I don't assist anyone else, it would be the victims. We have heard testimony upon testimony in committee, 4 and 5 years waiting to close, their loved ones lost. We lose witnesses, evidence gets old, and we've got to move these to worst of the worst cases. I think rape is horrible, and I think in many instances it should be at the front of the line. I think a judge can use his or her judgment most times on who they're going to prioritize going to court.
And I agree with you that, for those victims, it's almost unfathomable to think that they would have to be waiting all that time to go through that. But you make also the same point, which is, when I talked to 4 of my district judges yesterday and today, their comment was, we do prioritize. We do run the ones we need to run. We're running our docket right. One of them has a backlog of 15 cases that are prioritized right now that are crimes against under 17, under juveniles that are under the priority list. He has 10 murders. He goes, now I would have 25 cases in the inability to move my docket and take some other ones up because I have to move all of those first. And his other comment was, but I can always say, well, it's not quite ready for trial if I really want to skip around what you're going to write into law to be able to do what I want, which is answer to my constituents who have elected me and says, you run your caseload the way you should run it. And that's really sort of the challenge is my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I would love if we could, bracket this to Harris County, but my understanding is you can't do that with this part of the code. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I do not believe it's in our interest to bracket it to Harris County. Part of the issue is the workload. Your judges are hardworking. I'm going to give your judges the benefit of the doubt with your oversight. They're working hard. They're responsive to the public. We heard testimony in Harris County. The average court in Harris County, criminal court, has held 3 trials last year. Only 3 trials. And most of them were being conducted by visiting judges. So this is not the solution to Harris County's large problem. This is a first step to prioritize the worst of the worst. Then we have to, and I'm working with Senator Huffman, and we're going to look at it even from a financial standpoint. Judges have to produce more trials. And the multitude of problems, the district attorney has to be ready. The forensic funding, for instance, is a key concern in Harris County. We have a backlog of rape kits that need to be tested. There's a backlog of guns and other forensics that have to be prepared. But the bottom line is we see repeatedly that other cases, drug cases, and other nonviolent cases are ahead of the murders and capital murders. So this is an attempt to improve public safety, get the folks off bond, get them to trial, and hold them accountable.
And I just wish I knew that if we pass this, that those bad judges that you're describing that aren't doing their work would actually still do their work, and that backlog would go down. It would much more support one that says we hold judges accountable. If you don't produce this workload, you're removed from office. And then we hold elections to put a new judge in, and maybe the citizens will wake up and realize that it matters who they vote for what criminals they turn out on the streets. And that's the challenge that I face, which is my judges are saying this will hamper us from the way we think our court runs the best, the most efficient, and serves the citizens of our community. We understand what's going on in Harris County, but we also think those judges down there that don't want to do their job will find a workaround around this and it won't improve the situation.
Well,
how do we know, and where do we come back to that says in 2 years we revisit, and if the backlog hasn't shrank significantly, that we allow the other judges to go back to the way it was before?
Well, first of all, I've never seen a piece of legislation that can't be improved. So if we need to come back in 2 years and improve it, we will. If it creates an obstacle or some difficulty for your local judges, we would welcome that input. I'm telling you about a crisis as I stand here and talk to you today, that Harris County has 1,841 murderers and capital murders waiting to go to hearing and trial, with half of them on the streets of Houston, Harris County, and they don't remain in Harris County. They go to surrounding areas. They make it to Austin. They'll make it to Lubbock. They'll make it across the states. Certainly, my friends in Washington County are impacted. We have to take a huge first step by holding judges accountable because they're not taking murderers and capital murderers to trial. All crime is bad. And we already do this for family violence. We've already prioritized and given guidance to judges on other matters, and this one, I think, is a top priority. It will not solve all of our problems, but it is certainly one that speaks to this category of the worst of the worst.
And Dean, I know your intent with this is absolutely the best. It is for the citizens and making our community safer. And I fully understand where you're coming from on that. And again, I come back to, the challenges is my judges sit here and say, well, we just don't see this working well for us. And, theirs was, can you bracket it? Can you move it? I said, no, that's not allowed to be able to do this. I hope I feel that this is going to go through. I hope we come back in 2 years and we realize it's been better and improved upon. Maybe we look at adding rape into that category for the next time, but I don't know at what point do we put enough crimes in there that's all they'll ever be able to do and be able to process that. But holding those judges accountable, we need to figure out how potentially we can remove these bad ones in office without waiting 4 years for an election.
I can assure you the Harris County delegation works each and every day to try to improve the judicial members in Harris County. We speak out. We're going to deal with it through resources and in the Finance Committee. I would be glad to work with you and your judges. If one of your judges only has 15 pending cases, I don't believe this will affect him or her, top side or bottom.
Well,
you got to have a backlog that is creating an injustice and a crime problem and unfair to crime victims before this would address them.
I
trust me.
understand.
I'll tell you what, just trust me, okay?
As I said, I feel this is going to go through. I feel I'm going to trust you, and I'm praying that this works.
And I will meet with your judges.
County, but I will be voting no on it because that is the wish of my district.
I understand.
And I know I'm not going to move this body, but I wanted to be able to explain myself on why that I had the challenges I had with this. And the fact that we're addressing it, and it's a shame that that somebody would allow 1,800 murder cases.
Let me assure you, we're not through. We're going to reform bail bond practices in Harris County. I've got a bill that says you've got to at least deposit 10% to get a bail bond. We're working on other matters, but this is the first step. I wish you'd join us. If you don't, I respect you. I could use a line that was used on me when I first got over here. Senator, I can explain it to you, but I can't make you understand it. That was back in the old days. We respect each other much more.
Well, I think we still have the same amount of respect.
You got to represent your district, but I promise you, those of us from Harris County, including the president, knows this is serious business, and I look forward to working with you.
I know that this is not brought lightly. I know this is not a knee-jerk. I understand where you're coming from, Harris County. On it, and I hope that it accomplishes in that first step of many other steps.
It's a major step
to be able to do that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Whitmire, I'm surprised you can remember back that far when you first came in here.
Well, when you were a freshman when I got here, you were to be seen and not heard, which obviously doesn't apply to our current membership, but. It's a new day, Mr. President.
I don't know who changed that, Senator. Senator Huffman, you're recognized.
In fact, I think you were a freshman one time.
Yes.
And for the record, for those who haven't heard it, it serves repeating. If I'd have known when you sat right over there as a freshman that you were going to be the lieutenant governor someday, I would have been a lot nicer to you.
You've been nice enough. Thank you, my friend. Senator Huffman.
If permission to question the author?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Senator Whitmire, I'm trying to address Senator Springer's concerns a little bit. I don't know if we're going to change his mind, but there has been the law has been in existence, and I don't know for how long, but for a long time, that already set some parameters for a judge about how they should run their docket, about they just should, like people who are in jail rather than people at bond should be perhaps given priority for trial. So there's been rules in effect for many years, and the judges have sort of worked around that and used their common sense and followed the law. This simply adds murder to that list. It doesn't say, because I've read it several times now just to make sure I'm right on this, and as I read the law, it's not saying that murder has to be first. It's just putting murder into the list of other crimes and other situations that have already been in law. So it's just specifically naming murder and capital murder. So I think you had an example where your judge was concerned that they already had priority cases with under 17 victims, which has been in the law for a while. And now that murder would be added, then that would somehow make them do murder. They could still use, their judgment in how they would approach the priority cases. So I don't know if that helps you, but there is going to be situations, many times The judge may see what the preferences are or the priorities should be, but the prosecutors aren't ready for the trial, or the defense not ready for trial, or the defendant hasn't retained competency or lost competency. So, there's still lots of issues that judges will have to ascertain as to what is the most appropriate case to try. So we're not taking, Senator Whitmire, I'm sorry, I should be asking questions. You're not taking all judicial discretion away.
It puts it in a category that prioritizes these matters. And as I almost said Judge Huffman, as Senator Huffman would say, if a rape case is more prepared, witnesses are better prepared to go forward, it's not going to say, oh, you can't pursue the rape case because Whitmire says you got to do the murder. This just says make murder and capital murders the same priority that you have family violence, sexual abuse of a minor, and rape. So good.
Right. So I don't have any concerns about it, even in the rural areas. I represent rural areas as well, So I don't have a concern about that. I don't think we're stomping. I wish we could control the judges more. But, there's certain laws and rules and regulations, and there is judicial discretion. And I don't think this steps on their toes in that regard. Thank you, Senator Whitmire.
Oh, thank you for that assistance.
Senator Hinojosa, for what purpose?
Well, Senator Whitmire, yield.
Do you yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator Whitmire, the issue and problems that exist in Harris County are not only Harris County. In different regions of the state, we have a backlog of murder cases. But using Harris County, what is the average time that a murder case takes to go to trial?
The
4 or 5 years?
The average defendant's in jail 2.5 years right now, which is unheard of. But some of these cases that I'm speaking to have been waiting to go to trial 4 and 5 years. And you as an attorney knows, evidence gets old, witnesses get lost or pass, and the poor crime victim is sitting there with their life ruined with no hope of closure until we get these cases resolved. So that's what it does to the crime victims' family, but also public safety. They're out on the streets. And it's unheard of in my history of criminal justice that a capital murder would be out on bond. You just don't do that in the state of Texas. And we've got over 50 in Harris County, the worst of the worst. And they know when they're captured or apprehended, those that are fugitives, they're going to be held accountable and either get life without parole or death. So it's the most dangerous element that law enforcement has to deal with. And we've got to deal with this matter because of the crime victims, what it does to public safety, and what it does to our law enforcement officers.
And as you stated, evidence gets old, gets stale, it's lost, witnesses disappear, some are intimidated during that period of time. And the result of that, not only are the victims suffering, waiting for justice, but many of those cases end up being dismissed and much more difficult to prosecute and get a conviction for the crime they committed.
I totally agree, and you understand how serious this is.
And
our jail overpopulation, these folks are bad. These are dangerous, repeat violent offenders, and they abuse the jail employees and the co-defendants in the jail. We've got 10,000 people locked up in Harris County, larger than most states' prisons. It wasn't designed for 10,000. It's out of compliance. I got a call Friday from the Jail Standards Commission. Harris County is out of compliance again. So we've got a broken criminal justice system in Harris County. They are a part of the state of Texas, and that's why we're addressing it on the Senate floor, and we're not through. This is just the first step.
One more point, and that is that by making this case as a priority, not only does it put the court on notice that, hey, you got to pay attention to this court, to this case, and prioritize it, so it also puts the prosecutors on notice and the defense attorneys on notice that they got to be prepared. They got to push this case. They cannot just set it aside because, well, it's a lot more difficult to organize the evidence or there's a continuance that is not justified and the judges are given the continuance because of the attorneys involved. So I have not heard a single complaint from any of my rural counties about this bill. So I think it's a good bill. I think it's a good public policy, and I think it ought to be made a priority when we have a murder or capital murder case.
Thank you. And you just raised another related matter. You've got to allow the district attorney to have adequate resources. We heard a bill in finance this week, sponsored by Senator Huffman, that you cannot defund the district attorneys of this state. We've already passed that. It's law that you cannot defund law enforcement. The district attorneys are a critical element of the criminal justice system, and we're going to protect them from being defunded with Senator Huffman's legislation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator West, for what purpose?
Question of the author.
Do you yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, I'm supportive of your bill. Okay? And I always have angst that problems in Harris County are magnified and end up becoming statewide law. I'm okay with this right here. I got some I'm not okay with, but that's a different story. We'll talk about that. But, you mentioned a few moments ago that you wanted to think about a way to address this problem, and Senator Huffman, I'm asking you to think about your previous experience. Have you ever tried a case on a federal court?
Federal?
Yes.
No.
They have scheduling orders that are pretty much strictly construed by those courts. If indeed we want to put some meat on the bone, we need to, in these types of cases, we need to mandate, if best possible, that judges provide scheduling orders on these cases and strictly adhere to those scheduling orders. Now, there may be an issue concerning separation of powers or something like that, but I know in federal courts, when you go in there, there's a scheduling order. And to get around that scheduling order, if you miss a deadline and things like that, it's real hard, okay? So you may want to start thinking about whether we should put in the law, if indeed there's no separation of power of a constitutional issue, scheduling orders, and ask that they be adhered to with fidelity.
Very good. Thank you. I look forward to working with you. Great idea.
Senator Betancourt, what purpose?
Ask questions of the author.
Do you yield?
Thanks, John. I think the important part of this, and I hate to reduce this to, like math or a mathematical equation, but you've got a real backlog of serious murder trials that are occurring in areas like Harris County. I'm going from memory, but the DA testified there was 875 cases in backlog. I think 900 are on the streets, and I think 6 of them are, have fled, prosecution. So you've got a backlog, and the problem with that backlog is that those people are very highly likely to incur the second capital murder, or God forbid, a third. And so what you're really trying to do is bring back some common sense to judges that have proven for some reason they've left it behind. And that's an important point, because there are areas in the state that don't have that backlog. So by prioritizing capital murder, you're not prioritizing against another heinous crime, but what you're doing is clearing out a backlog that exists in the nation's third largest county, and it's too big to ignore. True?
So correct. And when you cite those numbers, this is what reality is. We've got a small number of people, 2,000, less than 2,000 charged with murder or capital murder, with half of them on the streets. I'm totally convinced, certainly talking to law enforcement and the stakeholders, that small group of people are terrorizing Houston, Harris County, because they don't just shoot somebody one time and stop. They're armed robbers. They're using weapons, guns. So they're repeat offenders, and until we hold them accountable, take them to trial, we're not going to be the safe community that you and I have experienced in the past. I was robbed at gunpoint in 1992, begged for my life with my 9-year-old and my daughter in a garage. That person got 25 years. That person was taken off the streets of Houston and was not a repeat violent offender any longer. So that's how you have to deal with people that use guns, that shoot folks, murder folks in a capital murder who's already been deemed to be a future risk to society. So those are the worst of the worst. We're trying to deal with them in this backlog. All the backlog is important. We've got over 100,000 cases backlog. I haven't even spoken to them. And looking at some kind of schedule that Senator West mentioned, we need to pursue that over 100,000. So it's a broken system. As you well know, in the paper today, we have a court-appointed attorney handling 600 cases that made $1 million from Harris County taxpayers last year. 400 felonies, 200 misdemeanors, one attorney. Physically impossible. The model in Harris County has been to reset, 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 and I'm sick and tired on behalf of the people that I represent that the murders and capital murders are being reset, reset, and reset. We take care of this category, and then we'll move to the armed robbers, the aggravated robbers, and the other violent offenders.
No, and the heinous crimes of aggravated rape that Senator Springer was talking about.
All the crimes.
Right,
bad.
because the problem with a system that's backlogged with people that are clear and present dangers to society is they're going to continue to do it. And
the defendants in the defense bar know how messed up it is. And you know what the practice is at the courthouse is? Don't even take what would be considered a reasonable plea bargain. A reasonable plea bargain of 7 or 8 years on a delivery of drugs. They say, no, next year they'll give you a better deal. So the entire criminal justice system is broken, and we're dealing with our first big step to deal with this most dangerous category, but there's other circumstances that need to be addressed.
And, Dean, I signed on to your bill because it's very important to take this step. And more importantly, in an area that does not have the level of this, horrific level of capital murder backlog, this common sense bill will just reinforce the common sense that's already occurring in those counties. And the real problem is we've got judges that have a lack of zero common sense when it comes to capital murder trials. And you're right, the culture now is they don't even accept the plea deal at all because why? They're never going to be set for trial anyway. They can just keep staying out for a long time. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about that, and also the fact that in an area that doesn't have this problem, okay, it's not going to be imposed upon them. It's basically a recognition of the obvious problem, and that's where, and in Harris County, that's the common sense that this bill is trying to bring to the bench. And if the long-term issues are going to be resolved hopefully by Senator Huffman's bills, but these type of steps are critical. Because quite frankly, we got people dying in Harris County that shouldn't be dying from these people. They should not be out on the street. They should not be fugitives because the criminal justice system had them and let them go and let them go and let them go. And because they never set the trial.
Senator Benton, I had a family came up to me the other day at the store and said, Senator Whitmire, you have to do something because we're afraid to leave the house after 5 o'clock. When people live in that kind of fear, it calls for some very bold action and urgency. See, the problem is I don't think a lot of folks in official capacity in Harris County see the urgency that you and I do today. When families are altering their lifestyle, not walking at night, not going out of their homes at
not going to the gas station, not going to the grocery store. Believe me, we hear it, all the nation hears it.
Can you believe people have to live in those conditions in a great city like Houston?
I bleed and cry for my hometown because it's become a place that my parents would not recognize and no one's parents would recognize. And no one wants this to happen. And so we got to take every one of these steps that we can.
Great people, and we deserve a great criminal justice system, and we do not have it as we talk today.
Well, Dean, thanks for bringing the bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Paxton, what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. To ask the author a question.
Do you yield?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Whitmire. And I appreciate your attention to our broken criminal justice system that, of course, is not new. It is decades old, and we all appreciate your work in this area. And I think there's wide acknowledgement in this body that accountability in this system is critical as we are increasingly dealing with rogue judges, rogue prosecutors who just refuse to do their job. And I appreciate what this bill is doing in that direction to bring some accountability. And as we think about accountability, my question for you, I brought this up just briefly before you began laying out the bill. And in the interest of accountability, what are the repercussions, should we pass this law, for a judge who refuses to do this?
Well, there'll be complaints with the Judicial Conduct Commission. There could be lawsuits. There will be this legislative body, but largely it would be the Judicial Conduct Commission. We can file complaints, and I wouldn't hesitate if a judge ignores his statute to file a complaint. And I'm certain I would have other members join me. In fact, perhaps even a former judge would join me. So we'll hold them accountable. They are independent elected, but they've got to follow the state law that we're hopefully passing today.
Do you believe that this creates another avenue for accountability in that respect?
There's no doubt in my mind this is going to give them guidance and accountability. And more equally important, maybe more important, the accountability to these defendants.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Alvarado, what purpose?
To ask the author a question.
Do you yield?
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Dean Whitmire is a fellow member of the Harris County delegation. I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue. I know you've been working hard to get your arms around a lot of things when it comes to law enforcement, criminal justice. Senator Huffman put it so well, the aspects from the judicial and court side of this issue, but to humanize the story, I know you had some victims assistance groups that came and testified in support. Can you just touch a little bit on that, on how it's impacting families and victims of murder?
Well, we had at least 3 families, families came before criminal justice last week. And obviously, words can't describe what they're living through. I mean, they're living through the worst of circumstances because they're afraid. Some of these folks that are out on bond, some of the fugitives, go near their homes. They're afraid. They're tampering with the witnesses. So it's horrible what the crime victims' families are going through. The duration, waiting to go to trial for 4 and 5 years, they never get closure. So you're absolutely right. Crime Stoppers brought us some victims that they've been working with in counseling. So there's so many reasons to pass this, to hold the defendant accountable, but certainly I would think at the top of the list for us to protect the families, the crime victims' families, from the harassment and literally danger and threat from some of these folks that are out on bond 4 and 5 years. They're intimidating these families that need to go to court and be witnesses. So that's a major factor in bringing this legislation.
Well, thank you for addressing the law enforcement side, but also for humanizing this issue and talking about the victims and their families. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Flores, what purpose?
To ask the authors some questions.
Do you yield?
Yes, sir.
Dean, thank you for your service and thank you in criminal justice and in this body. I just have just a couple of questions and perhaps a comment. So would you agree, Dean, that in the categories of felonies, that a capital felony is the highest degree, which is punishable by death?
Capital murder is the highest responsibility that we have as elected officials. It's the most extreme punishment. that we place on someone. It's the most extreme charge we place on someone, and that's the reason this legislation addresses capital murders as well as murders.
A murder, as you propose to add as a priority, it would be a felony of the first degree, which is right below capital, on the top of the felony list. Would you agree with that, Dean? So would you also agree that the reason that they were put at the top of the penal code in terms of punishment was because of the severity that this body felt that capital crimes and first-degree felonies should be handled in the penal system?
Yes, sir. And they have to be ruled a future risk to the public. That's a really huge criteria.
So as I would see it, members, is that this body through time has placed capital murder as one of the most heinous crimes at the top of the penal code, punishable by death. In other words, the biggest risk to our state. First-degree murder, right below that, the highest level of punishment in the penal code. Would you agree, Dean, that if you have an area in any category, let's just say in crime, that where the law is not being followed appropriately or carried out in a responsible manner, where capital murderers are being put out on bond, first-degree murders are being put out on bond and are loose and unaccounted for, and when we have these areas, no matter where they would be in the state, that would present a clear and present danger to everyone around them and the entire population of the state. Would you agree with that?
I would, and it's unheard of in legislative history that a capital murder would be given a bond, because, as you pointed out, their ultimate punishment is the worst and the most extreme, and there's a reason that punishment is at that level, because they're considered such a high risk. And then we have judges placing them on bond, and then they become fugitives, which presents a danger to the public and particularly to law enforcement.
So your bill would add these to those lists of violations that would be classified as priorities, but merely this body would be clarifying that capital murder, the highest degree of punishment in the penal code, and first-degree murder would be added to this list that already exists.
Yes, sir.
So I support this bill because I know that when you have areas where the law is not being carried out, whether it's misdemeanors or felonies, that it carries over to their neighbors, and in fact, in this mobile society, to the entire state. And I thank you for that, and I would vote yes.
Thank you, and I'm pleased to have you as Vice Chairman of Criminal Justice.
Senator Whitmire moves to suspend the regular order of business. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
There be 21 yes votes, 1 no vote. The rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading. Senate Bill 402. 29 to 1 if I misspoke. 29 to 1. Forgive me. The chair lays out is it now 30-0? You're changing your vote there? All right. Chair lays out now on second reading, Senate Bill 402. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 402 relating to preference given by trial courts to hearings and trials for murder and capital murder offenses.
You recognize the motion to engrossment?
I'm so moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Bill passed to engrossment. You recognize suspend the constitutional 3-day rule?
I do move so.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart.
30 ayes, no nays. The constitutional 3-day rule is suspended. Chair lays out in third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 402. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 402 relating to the preference given by trial courts to hearings and trials for murder and capital murder offenses.
You recognize on final passage?
I move final passage of Senate Bill 402.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell.
29 ayes, 1 nay. The bill is finally passed. Thank you for bringing this to the floor, Senator. Chair lays out Senate Bill 994 by Swertner. You're recognized to suspend the regular order of business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this bill, Senate Bill 994, builds upon the government's interest in preventing voter confusion and ballot overcrowding. The bill provides that a candidate may be declared ineligible for placement on the ballot if the candidate fails to pay the required filing fee or fails to submit a petition in lieu of the filing fee. The bill also goes further by designating the Texas Secretary of State as an authority who may declare a candidate as ineligible. Simply put, the bill enforces the candidate's application filing fee requirements across all party lines. Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the regular order of business table to consider at this time Senate Bill 994.
Is there any objection? Hearing none. Rules are suspended. Chair lays on second reading Senate Bill 994. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 994, relating to the declaration of a candidate's ineligibility on the basis of failure to pay a filing fee or submit a petition in lieu of a filing fee.
You're recognized on passage to engrossment.
So moved, Mr. President.
Senator Eckhart, what purpose?
The author, sir?
Do you yield?
Certainly, I yield.
Senator Schwertner, the Elections Code is a very, very difficult code to unravel, isn't it?
It is.
So my apologies for how these questions may be a bit scattered. I have 4 different sections of the Elections Code spread across my desk trying to determine the effects of this bill. It's true, of course, that major parties that receive 20% or more of the vote in statewide elections as determined by the turnout in the governor's election must hold a primary to determine their nominees on the general election ballot, correct?
Senator, I'm not 100% advised on that, but if you're saying that, I believe you.
It's Section 172 of the Election Code. Major parties receiving 20% or more must have a primary. If a party receives less than 20% but more than 2%, they can elect to either have a primary or to have a nominating convention.
Okay.
Is that a common? Do we agree on that understanding?
We agree. Yes.
That's also in Section 172 of the Elections Code. Then in Section 181 of the Elections Code, that lays out a party that may have a convention to determine their nominee, what they have to go through. So a separate section, I believe it's 180... It might be 174 or 140. Again, I've got so many codes up here. The state participates financially in major parties' primaries through the primary fund. Is that our common understanding?
There is a state primary fund administered by the Secretary of State, correct?
Actually, it's administered by the parties with oversight by the Secretary of State, correct?
Yes.
And primary fees paid to the parties, either the county party or the state party, go into that fund, correct?
That is correct. That's my understanding.
But a party that elects to determine their nominees by a convention is not required to have a filing fee. And indeed, the primary filing fee fund cannot be used for a convention.
That is correct. They are required to pay a filing fee. In fact, they are given notice of that requirement on the application. They sign their name, all candidates, on the minor and major party applications. They sign their name to the application, and they swear under oath that they understand their requirements as a candidate for office in the state of Texas. So they are required to pay a filing fee. The concern is that this bill addresses is the lack of enforcement of the filing fee requirement. And this bill simply adjusts the removal process for a candidate that fails to pay a filing fee or submit a petition in lieu of the filing fee. And secondarily, the bill allows for the Secretary of State to remove that, or not remove, but make ineligible for placement on the ballot a candidate that fails to either pay the filing fee or submit a petition in lieu of the filing fee.
Can you tell me what the state, can you cite to me where in code the filing fee is required? Is it Chapter 173, Section 173?
What I would direct you to, Senator, would be the actual application for nomination by convention.
Well, and I'm not asking you for what the application promulgated by the Secretary of State says. I'm asking you for the statutory authority for the filing fee.
The statutory authority, I would have to look at the code myself. Obviously, you might have it there in front of you, but there is a legislation that was passed back in 2019, I think, by at that time Representative Springer and others, that put in place certain filing fee schedules as under Texas Election Code 172.024, which designated a dollar amount for whatever office that individual was applying for. For instance, the U.S. Senator would be a $5,000 filing fee, a state senator, $1,250 filing fee. So there are delineated filing fees for various candidates. I'm being advised that Section 181 for the minor candidates, minor party candidates, and Section 172 for the major party candidates.
I see now what you are referring to. Section 172.024 filing fee.
For the major party. Now, for the minor party candidates, that's Section 181.
181, and can you tell me what section?
Senator, I'm not advised as to the specifics. I don't have all the statute. As you said earlier, there's a large amount of election law.
I hear you.
But the bottom line is there are statutory requirements, and those requirements are delineated very clearly on an attachment to the application, and the attachment is a one-page delineation that the title of it is Filing Fee Schedule, and it specifically states the amount of money that each office encumbers when a candidate files for that office.
I see I see what you're referring to, and I'm looking at Section 172.024 filing fee. The filing fee for a candidate for nomination in the general primary election is as follows. So I believe that the filing fees in both instances, whether it is a county primary, a primary for a county position or a primary for a state position, in either case, the filing fee goes to the primary.
The filing fee goes, in the case of major party candidates, to the party via a fund that is overseen by the Secretary of State. That fund is the state primary fund. In the case of a minor party candidate, I understand it either goes to the county itself or to the Secretary of State / State of Texas, and the amount of money. And that is so de minimis that it just is in their GR, I believe.
And then that primary fund can only be used for primaries. It cannot be used for conventions, correct?
That's right. And this bill doesn't speak to the policy of utilizing that money. This bill goes to the heart of the matter of an individual that wishes to become a candidate, fulfilling the requirements of becoming a candidate. And that is, of course, in this case, the paying of a filing fee or submission of an application in lieu or a petition in lieu of a filing fee. And it also, this bill secondarily allows the Texas Secretary of State to take enforcement action. In general, the bill just adjusts the removal process for an individual that's not fulfilling the requirements of the application.
So how does this differ from Section 141.032 that already sets out a process to review an application and provide notice to a candidate?
Section 145?
141.032.
I don't have that section in front of me. There are ways in which a candidate that may be declared ineligible. One is that the information is on the application is incorrect. And that facts that indicate that candidate is ineligible are conclusively established by another public record. This would add another third section that the candidate may be declared ineligible for failure to pay the filing fee or submit a petition in lieu of the filing fee.
And the reason why I ask with regard to section 141.032 is I believe that that is the provision that sets out the review of the application. And unlike your proposed bill, says that the review shall be completed not later than the 5th day after the date the application is received by the authority, and in the event that there is a petition associated with the application.
That might be about the review of the application.
May I finish? May I finish?
Certainly.
And to the extent that the application includes a petition, the review shall be completed as soon as practicable after the date the application is received by the authority. Unless the petition is challenged, the authority is only required to review the petition for facial compliance. The reason why I ask is your bill says that the review and the notice of ineligibility can occur as late as 31 days prior to the election, whereas this provision requires the review to occur as soon as practicable.
Yeah, there are two different things here. You're referring to the review of the application. The section of code that's being amended in this bill has to do with the declaration of a candidate being ineligible, and that's section 145. And again, I didn't touch anything in election law other than the allowance of the Secretary of State to remove a candidate or to declare a candidate ineligible if that candidate fails to pay the filing fee or submit a petition in lieu of the filing fee. Those are the only two changes of the bill, as you can clearly see in the 2-page bill. And the portions of the election code that are changed are only section 145.
Well, at the end of the day, it does appear that this bill is designed to be able to knock a candidate off of the general election ballot based on a Secretary of State's determination very close to the election, giving almost such an exceedingly narrow window for due process to get back on the ballot as to be impractical. So it does appear that this provision is not so much about assuring eligibility as it is being able to knock off a general election candidate that has been duly selected by their party, either by convention or by primary.
The time
Most
frames,
likely by convention.
The time frames for declaring a candidate ineligible are not changed at all in this bill. They are exactly as they are currently in code.
Really?
That's correct. It just changes the removal reason, in this case, the failure to pay a filing fee or the submission of a petition in lieu of a filing fee being added as a criteria for ineligibility. And secondarily, this allows the Secretary of State to remove that candidate the Secretary of State to remove that candidate if they find in their judgment that the candidate did not pay the filing fee or submit the petition in lieu of the filing fee.
Thank you for answering my questions. I'm still unclear as to why you feel you need this added layer of protection, since we've just gone through 4 different sections of the Elections Code, all of which have requirements that can be enforced by the party, by an individual, or by the Secretary of State, even without your bill.
If we want fair and equitable elections, I believe any individual applying and putting their name, signing their name, swearing under oath, and having been given due notice on the application that they must submit a filing fee or a petition in lieu of the filing fee, I believe that should apply to everybody, whether or not you are a Green Party candidate, Libertarian candidate, Republican, or Democrat. That is a state law, and we should enforce that state law, and this bill goes to a more stringent enforcement of that portion of the election code.
Could this have anything to do with the lawsuit that's currently active between the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party with regard to the constitutionality of a filing fee?
Well, there were some lawsuits over the interim, and I believe that case has been settled. But the lawsuit, the actual judgment, did not declare specific findings of the merits of why the lawsuit was brought forth. Therefore, I think it's important that the legislature actually give voice and for further clarification as to this issue when it comes to a candidate that wants to put their name on the ballot but doesn't want to pay a filing fee as required by state law.
Or a primary.
Or for fulfillment of the requirements on the application.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Middleton, what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield?
Do you yield?
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Schwertner. I just had a really couple quick questions. I believe you're referring to House Bill 2504 that was passed in the 29-19 session, the 86 regular. And really all that did is it set a uniform filing fee structure for everyone that applies to put their name on the ballot. Of course, it still allows for the petition as well. But, you know, all that bill did is it just set a uniform structure. So I think we're understanding this right here. Your bill, Senate Bill 994, just says, look, if you're going to put your name on the ballot, you need to follow the law.
That's absolutely correct. And this gives greater enforcement potential via the Secretary of State declaring a candidate eligible for lack of payment of a filing fee or submission of a petition in lieu of the filing fee.
Right. And I think that's a great policy to say, look, in the state of Texas, if you're going to put your name on the ballot, you do need to follow the law, and your bill just provides an enforcement mechanism to make sure that the candidates that are doing so follow our filing fee requirements.
That's right.
So, thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Springer, what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President, to ask a couple questions.
Do you yield?
I yield.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. And you may have said in your layout, I may have missed it, but it's also that write-in candidates currently have to pay a filing fee as well.
That is correct, right. And there's an aspect of fairness here of candidates and minor parties and writing that do or do not pay a filing fee that if they don't pay a filing fee and they're in the same party, that just would seem to be a situation in which that candidate is disenfranchised because they paid a fee and their fellow party individual did not, and so it's a uniformity application and uniformity enforcement of a state law, in this case the filing fee.
And not only the uniformity, but just efficiency of government, the fact you don't have to go to courts and tie up the courts, that something can be ruled on from this perspective.
Right. Yes.
Also helps streamline things.
Yeah, there's the review of the application, and there's the aspect of certification, and then there's actually removal of a candidate once they're on the ballot. And that removal process obviously is a much more onerous process that involves obviously the courts. And so it's good to have ballots that are not overstuffed by candidates that have not fulfilled the actual application requirements. And so this goes to again the overall the approval of the application and then the actual certification of the application, the first couple of steps.
Well, Senator, I appreciate it. You took a good bill that I passed in the House and made it a much better bill by adding this. Thank you.
And thank you for your work on this. I understand this was some of this was, you'd worked on this several sessions ago regarding uniformity of the filing fee.
Senator, you're recognized on engrossment. Is there any objection? Hearing there's objection, Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores, Gutierrez, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, King. Okay. La Mantilla, Menendez, Middleton, Miles, Nichols, Parker, Paxton, Perry, Schwertner, Sparks, Springer, West, Whitmire, and Zaffarini.
Bill passes to engrossment. You would need two votes, one more to help you suspend the constitutional 3-day rule, or you can wait till tomorrow if you want to find a friend.
Thank you.
The vote was 23 and 7 noes. 23 yes, 7 noes. Senator Swertner, you're recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved, Mr. President.
Secretary will call the roll when ready.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco.
24 ayes, 6 nays. The 3-day rule is suspended. Chair now lays out in third reading and final passage Senate Bill 559. Secretary will read the caption.
Senate Bill 994, relating to the declaration of a candidate's ineligibility on the basis of failure to pay a filing fee or submit a petition in lieu of a filing fee.
Yeah, that is Senate Bill 994, my mistake. You're recognized on final passage.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move final passage of Senate Bill 994.
Secretary will call the roll when ready.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
23 ayes, 7 nays. The bill is finally passed. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members.
Senator Hughes, you're recognized to suspend on Senate Bill 559, third reading.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I move to suspend the Senate's regular order of business to take up and consider at this time Senate Bill 559, protecting free speech. I move suspension.
Secretary will call the roll on suspension on Senate Bill 559.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton.
21 ayes, 9 nays. The rule is suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage Senate Bill 559. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 559, relating to discrimination against or burdening certain constitutional rights of an applicant for or holder of a license to practice law in this state.
You're recognized on final passage.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move final passage.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
21 ayes and 9 nays. The bill is finally passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.
Senator Perry.
Senator Huffman, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business rules on committee substitute 645.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. At this time, I move to suspend the regular order of business, take up the committee substitute Senate Bill 645.
Senator Huffman moves suspension of the regular order.
I'm going to talk a little if that's okay. Yep.
I'll let you talk a little.
Thank you. Members, we're going to call this bill the Combating Fentanyl Bill. In recent years, overdoses in the United States have skyrocketed due to the increased production and smuggling of fentanyl, an incredibly potent synthetic opioid. According to the CDC, in the 12-month period ending in February 2022, more than 75,000 Americans died from overdose of synthetic opioids, mainly from fentanyl. In fact, this has made fentanyl the #1 killer, the #1 ahead of car wrecks, suicides, everything, the #1 killer of adults between the ages of 18 to 45. Since the beginning of Operation Lone Star and Texas's effort to secure the border, the Texas Department of Public Safety has seized over 353 million lethal doses of fentanyl, which is enough to kill nearly every person in the United States. In 2021, the 87th passed Senate Bill 768, which I authored, which increased the criminal penalties for manufacturing and delivering over 1 gram of fentanyl, creating its own group that appropriately reflects the lethality of fentanyl compared to other drugs. Following the passage of SB 768, we have tragically learned the extent of how dangerous fentanyl is and how even under 1 gram is so dangerous. We learned a lot in these last 2 years. So to continue our efforts to keep this drug from hitting our communities, the committee substitute to Senate Bill 645 increases the penalty for manufacturing or delivery of less than 1 gram of fentanyl from a state jail felony to a third-degree felony. Furthermore, if an individual dies from a fentanyl overdose, the penalty would be enhanced to a second degree. This is designed to address the one-pill scenario where, due to the lethality of fentanyl compared to other illicit drugs, it only takes 1 pill to kill. The bill also includes possession of fentanyl with intent to deliver. It puts it into the organized criminal activity statute. That was at the request of prosecutors who have seen instances where this would have been an effective tool to combat the manufacture, delivery, and organized crime dealing with fentanyl. Also, the bill clarifies penalty level for drug offenses to ensure more efficient prosecution of these crimes. It's really just that part is cleanup language. I am going to have a couple of floor amendments. I'll tell you what they are. One is going to talk about fentanyl poisoning, clarify how we define that. It's an important part of how these crimes can be prosecuted. I also am going to ask you to adopt a floor amendment that deals with making it a murder. Actually, in the murder statute, if you deliver a fentanyl, manufacture or deliver, and it causes the death of an individual. This will just give prosecutors another tool. They have a couple of different ways they could prosecute this if a death resulted, and I wanted to give those options. Members, we've reached a critical point in the fentanyl crisis here in Texas. We have no choice but to take a comprehensive approach to what is going on. In Senate Bill 1, which is the budget, I've allocated over $18 million to support overdose prevention, education, and reversal medication like Narcan, making it available to law enforcement. This record amount of funding will provide this overdose reversal medication for law enforcement, also for first responders, healthcare providers, schools, and community organization. Additionally, Senate Bill 1 includes a record $4.6 billion for Operation Lone Star to help secure our southern border. I know Senator Birdwell is working on those issues. We're also appropriating $147 million to the DPS Crime Lab to assist in the prosecution throughout the state of fentanyl-related crimes. It's a fact that fentanyl is flooding our borders. It is absolutely, without a doubt, killing our citizens on a daily basis, and it's time that we take a comprehensive approach to combating this deadly drug. So I move for suspension of the regular order of business.
Senator Huffman moves suspension of regular order of business rules for committee substitute 645. Is there objections? Hearing none, Rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading. Committee Substitute 645. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 645 relating to the designation of fentanyl poisoning for purposes of the death certificate and to the criminal penalties for certain controlled substance offenses.
Members, there are amendments following amendment.
Floor Amendment number 1 by Huffman.
You recognize Senator Huffman on the amendment.
Thank you. Members, this floor amendment incorporates feedback I received from medical examiners and prosecutors regarding the labeling of a fentanyl-related overdose as fentanyl poisoning, which I had in the original bill. After we listened to a lot of testimony in the committee process, the prosecutors and the medical examiners felt that we needed to change the language so it will allow for the death certificate to indicate that fentanyl poisoning contributed to the cause of death when the medical examiner identifies a lethal amount of fentanyl and the results of the examination are consistent with opioid intoxication as a cause of death. These changes will help avoid a situation being labeled a fentanyl poisoning where there is fentanyl present, which we want to know about in the body, but there is another clear cause of death. It also consolidates remaining fentanyl derivatives because we had left a couple of them out in the original bill, and it puts them into the appropriate penalty. So if it's a little bit different chemical composition, but fentanyl derivative, that it would be included in the bill. So I move adoption of floor amendment number 1.
Is there any objection to floor amendment number 1? Hearing none, amendment is adopted. Members, amendment number 2. Secretary will read the caption.
Floor Amendment number 2 by Huffman.
Secretary Huffman, explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this floor amendment gives prosecutors an additional tool in the prosecution of fentanyl-related crimes. The amendment adds that a person commits the offense of murder if they knowingly manufacture or deliver fentanyl and an individual dies from the consumption of that substance. It also allows, of course, for a defense to prosecution if the manufacturing or delivery of the substance was done for legal medical purposes, because fentanyl is sometimes used for medical purposes. This would be a first-degree felony. Again, this could be used as a tool for prosecutors. It may be that they find it's easier to prosecute under the other statute that I passed that would make it a second-degree felony, but there may be extraordinary cases where it's clear-cut, and the prosecutor then could have this tool to file for a first-degree felony. So I move adoption of floor amendment number 2.
Is there any objection to the amendment number 2? Hearing none, amendment is adopted. Senator Huffman recognized for a motion.
I move passage to engrossment of the committee substitute Senate Bill 645 as amended.
Senator Huffman moves passage to engrossment. Committee substitute 645. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the bill passes to engrossment. Senator Huffman recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart, Flores.
Being 30 ayes and no nays, the rules are suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage of Committee Substitute Senate Bill 645. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 645 relating to the designation of fentanyl poisoning for purposes of the death certificate and to the criminal penalties for certain controlled substance offenses.
Senator Huffman is recognized for a motion.
I move final passage of the Committee Substitute Senate Bill 645.
Senator Huffman moves final passage on Committee Substitute 645. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
Being 30 ayes and no nays, bill passed. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, members.
Senator Huffman, we have a resolution in between you and the next bill, so we'll move over to the resolution. Chair lays out the following resolution. Secretary will read the resolution.
Senate Resolution 315 by West and Miles, recognizing March 15, 2023 as Minority Business Enterprise Public Policy Day at the state capitol.
Chair recognizes Senator West on the resolution.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and members. On behalf of Senator Miles and myself, I'd like to present Senate Resolution 315 for the 2023 Minority Business Enterprise Public Policy Day here at the state capitol. Many of them will be visiting your office. This organization is a champion of MWB and HUB programs. I rise to welcome and acknowledge the coalition of advocates, organizations for minority business enterprises in the state Texas Historically Underutilized Business Program for the economic powerhouses of 3 metropolitan areas: the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Houston-Galveston, Austin-San Antonio, aka the Golden Texas Triangle. Chambers of Commerce members and other advocacy organizations and private and public sector buying entities from across the state are here at the Capitol today for the 2023 Minority Business Enterprise Public Policy Day, and I would like for them to stand at this time, or they're already standing, some of the representatives that are members of the leadership of this organization, and I'd like for us to welcome them to their state capitol. I move adoption.
Is there objection to the adoption of the resolution? Chair hears none. The resolution is adopted. Senator Huffman recognized for motion to suspend the regular order of business rules on committee substitute 1319.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, at this time I move to suspend the regular order of business, take up and consider committee substitute Senate Bill 1319. Members, as we discussed in my last bill, overdose cases in Texas have been on the rise due to the increased presence of fentanyl poisoning unsuspecting drug users in the state of Texas. Currently, the way the Texas Medical Information Act fits into the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, certain state entities do not have liability coverage under HIPAA, which enables them to share overdose information. This information can help identify overdose spike areas, deploy overdose responses, and target and secure community resources. Under HIPAA, the public safety umbrella, which covers law enforcement, fire departments, and EMTs, are not covered from liability. The public safety umbrella has the pertinent information needed to do overdose mapping, but the only way for a public safety entity to be immune from liability under HIPAA is to have a mandatory state law. The Department of Justice funds an overdose mapping system through the Bureau of Justice Assistant Governmental Program called ODMAP that is free for law enforcement use across the country. Regardless of the legal uncertainties that currently exist, over 75 Texas public safety entities currently actually use the ODMAP system. So this bill allows a law enforcement officer, first responder, or other person who administers emergency services at an overdose incident to provide overdose information to a governmental entity that maintains a computerized system through a participation agreement. The bill clearly states that the information is confidential and that a person under this bill who shares it is clear of liability. It does not include any personal information of the victim. It only includes the date and time, the approximate location of the overdose, whether an opioid antagonist was administered, and the final result or the outcome of the patient. I will have a floor amendment that makes this mandatory for all law enforcement to participate. Or local health authority, and I have been questioned about why make it mandatory. I will say that this service is free, so there is not a mandate. It just takes a few minutes for them to fill out. They'll be able to download it on their phone. It's really answering about 4 or 5 questions about, again, the date and time, where they are, whether they administered Narcan, and the outcome of the patient. This will give us an overall view statewide of what is actually going on. This will be a huge tool for DPS and other law enforcement agencies that are trying to track throughout Texas what is going on. A couple of nights ago, I had a conversation with Freeman Martin, who many of you know. He's directly under Colonel McCraw at DPS. And he told me that in just this last week in downtown Austin, so within a few blocks of where we are, there were 21 overdoses in a 24-hour period, and 3 people died. That's within the grounds just where we can see from this Capitol. In a 3-week period this month in Hays County, ISD, Hays County, makes me tear up because it's so heartbreaking, had 3 students overdose. The youngest to die was 15, and the oldest was 17. That's in Hays County. Not sure who in here represent Senator Zaffirini. Those are your constituents. So, yes, I decided to make this mandatory because I think it's critical that we be able to look, and it's real time. You can look on this, see real time where the overdoses are occurring. I think it will be a wake-up call to law enforcement and medical personnel. If they see that something is happening in their area, they may be able to be more responsive, recognize the symptoms quicker, and respond to calls for help quicker. So that's the bill. I think it's important, and I move to suspend the regular order
Senator
of business.
Menendez, for what purpose?
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield for questions?
You yield.
Yes.
First of all, before I ask a question, I'd like to thank you. I wanted to sign on to your prior bill because before you brought up the students that have recently overdosed, I was shocked. This summer, I was brought to my attention by a school board trustee that a child was poisoned by fentanyl that someone put inside a bag of candy. So many times when people think of fentanyl, they're thinking about drug abuse, but many times it's young people purchasing what they think to be a prescription drug.
Exactly. Yes.
And they think it's something to help them take a test or stay awake. And it's actually, and the fentanyl is so little needs to be used to kill someone. And so I want to thank you for what you're doing. We have a bill to provide opioid antagonists like Narcan and Naxalone in schools because of what's happening. So thank you. I forgot the question because I'm just so frustrated that the numbers are so high and that people don't even know the danger that they're in. So thank you for bringing this bill forward.
Thank you very much, Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Huffman moves suspension of the regular order of business on Committee Substitute 1319. Is there objection? Hearing none. Rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading. Committee Substitute 1319. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 1319, relating the reporting of certain overdose information and the mapping of overdose for public safety purposes.
Following amendment. Senator Huffman, explain the amendment.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Secretary, read the amendment.
Floor Amendment number 1 by Huffman.
Senator Huffman, explain the amendment.
Yes, this is a floor amendment I referred to, which does make it mandatory for participation, and it defines emergency medical services personnel and overdose to clarify the individuals who will be responding to these cases and have access to this information. It clarifies information sharing requirements and liability coverage under the bill. It just makes it a little clearer, but it is mandatory. And I move for adoption of floor amendment number 1.
Is there any objection to the amendment adoption? Hearing none, the amendment is adopted. Recognized for a motion.
I move passage to engrossment of the committee substitute Senate Bill 1319.
Senator Huffman moves passage to engrossment. Bill's passed to engrossment. Is there objection? Sorry, hearing none. Bill's passed to engrossment. Senator Huffman is recognized for a motion to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
So moved.
Senator Huffman moves suspension of the 3-day rule. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell.
Being 30 yeses and no nays, Bill's rules are suspended. Chair lays out on third reading and final passage Senate Bill, Committee Substitute Senate Bill 1319. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 1319, relating the reporting of certain overdose information and the mapping of overdoses for public safety purposes.
Senator Huffman is recognized for a motion.
I move final passage of the committee substitute to Senate Bill 1319.
Senator Campbell, for what purpose?
To comment on the bill.
You're recognized.
Senator Huffman, this is an important bill. You've done great work on it. This is an issue that affects not just Texas, but the United States. And other states can learn from this bill. Thank you very much. Good work.
Senator Huffman moves final passage on committee substitute 1319. Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Campbell, Creighton, Eckert.
13 yeses and no nays. The bill is finally passed.
Thank you, members.
Is it 30? Okay. Members, the President's desk is clear. Are there any announcements? Chairman. Senator Huffman for an announcement.
Yes, the Senate Committee on Finance will reconvene at 2:20.
Senator Goforth, do you have an announcement?
Why, thank you, Mr. President. I do. The Senate Health and Human Services Committee will we will convene at 2:30 today.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make a correction on that?
You may, Senator Goforth.
I'm trying to juggle with other committees, but I think let's say 2:15.
2:15 on what hearing? Just so everybody's listening.
We are going to reconvene on the Senate floor.
There you go. Senator Birdwell for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the Border Security Committee will meet tomorrow, Thursday, March 16th at 9 a.m. in room E1016. Thank you, Mr. President and members.
Thank you, Mr. Birdwell. Senator Springer for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education will go back in at 2:15 in E1028. 2:15.
Chair recognizes Senator Hughes for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I move to suspend the posting rules to allow the Senate Committee on State Affairs to add Senate Bill 1029 to our agenda for the hearing tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. here in the Senate chamber. That's my motion.
Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion is adopted. All right. Chair recognized for the Dean of the Senate for a highly privileged motion.
Mr. President, members, I move that the Senate adjourn until 11 a.m. Thursday, March 16th.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The Senate stands adjourned until 11 a.m. Thursday, March 16th.